Okay, so, I already know what our topic was today because we were going to talk about quiet quitting. So it was just perfect to me that yesterday you and I had this, I thought, hysterical conversation that I just have to share because I'm sorry, it was just adorable. Okay, so you were adorable. It was really kind of funny.
Thank you.
But I'm sure it was very disappointing to you. Okay, so there's this really hot show out there, Severance, which you seem to have just noticed, even though it's been out for...
in my defense, I started watching it. It was, you know how sometimes you're in a mood for a show, like you want something fast and action, or you want something pensive. And I wanted fast action. I was watching like CIA espionage movies. And then I turned on Severance, and the first episode is like incredibly slow. And
walking through white hallways very slowly.
I did kind of like put it up on hold for later. I was like, this is probably going to be good, but...
Okay, so I will take that statement back.
Thank you.
Okay, you were waiting for the mood. I actually totally relate to that because sometimes I'm not in the mood.
It was slow at this point.
It was. So yesterday you and I were talking outside and you're like, oh my God, wait a minute, Sunday. Have I even told you I'm watching Severance? And I was like, oh yeah, you are. And I was so excited for you because I had already watched it. Yeah. I freaking loved it. Yeah. Right. And so I'm thinking, I'm so excited for my coworker because he's watching this great show that I loved. We can talk about it.
Well, and you and I both love stuff that goes really deep and dark. Like we can go there where we'll both say that like our spouses aren't into that so much. Like we kind of like to go there sometime. It's almost therapeutic or like helps to...
Whereas,
So anyway, the fact that it's like a really kind of weird, messed up thing going on, I like that. And so I knew you would too. I was like, you got to watch this show. You're like, Steve, already watched it. Already
watched it. So you are telling me, oh my gosh, I cannot wait to get home from work today because I'm going to watch the final episode. And I was sharing in that joy with you. I was like, oh my God. I was like, you should actually watch Here in the Office. Remember, I was like, and you're like, no. And then you had this event to go to and all this. And so you told me some things that you saw on Severance.
Oh yeah. I won't give it away for anyone but I was basically explaining some stuff in the last episode that was like, and then they see the big picture, screens and her face is on the screen.
Remember, he was painting.
Yeah.
And I'm thinking to myself, I mean, it's been a while since I watched it, but it feels like you're really close to the end, except you didn't say the big reveal things. And so I was like, I can't say it, but I can't wait till you watch it.
Right. Because I kept saying, oh my gosh, I can't wait to get home. And like, after I put Lucy to bed, I'm going to watch the last episode of Severance. And I cannot wait to see what happens.
So I even said goodbye to you in the parking lot with enjoy Severance tonight, right?
Yeah.
So today I talked to you and I'm like, how was it? And you're like, oh. You want to tell our listeners what happened?
Well, I mean, I told you like, I was like, it was so disappointing because I'm all excited. Okay, kid is in bed.
Like set that stage. We know it's a lot of work to get to that quiet moment at night.
Right. It was a lot of work and everyone in the house knows I cannot wait to watch this episode. No one's bugging me. And then I started, I'm like, get all comfortable. I put in my AirPods so no one can, I'm like, yes, I can't wait to see what happens. Turn it on. And like 3 minutes in, it cuts out, it's done. And it moves to, how Apple TV will like go to the next type of show.
Yeah.
Because you're done with
We're done.
And I'm like, no, I want to watch the last episode. And it's like, no, we're moving you on to whatever, some cowboy movie. I'm like,
you
what?
Already watched the last episode and didn't know it.
It was so depressing.
It was very depressing, but very hysterical to me. I just feel like it was hysterical how you were so looking forward to it. Then I was like, were you disappointed in the ending?
No, it was just I had already seen the ending.
You just didn't know it was the ending.
I thought there was one more episode for some reason. But then it sparked this whole other thought today, which is
what was that, Steve?
Well, you know how there used to be like the show was on once a week and you'd really look forward to Thursday night when, the new Survivor episode was on.
Yeah.
And like my whole family would gather around to watch it. Mm-hmm. And now it seems like everything, there's just constant, you can kind of binge stuff because everything's there.
Yeah.
I think it's kind of interesting how Apple TV is almost like changing the game again, where they do release all the episodes of a season, but then there's a big gap until the next season.
Also, they don't always, like if you watch Severance, they do like a week. Like I was watching this other one, the girls sing Surface, maybe. And it's like every Friday.
Yeah.
Hulu's doing it a little bit too. I'm watching The Patient with Steve Carell. Creepy. And the episodes are only like, by the way, like 30 minutes long, pisses me off, but they only come out every like Friday.
Yeah. Yeah.
So it is, but it brings me back.
And I think they're smart though.
Yeah.
I don't know if they're doing it intentionally. I feel like everything they do is intentional, but it kind of gives you that anticipation of
someone said we need to bring it back old school.
Yeah. Well, it's kind of like, I mean, we're September 2022.
Yeah.
Ted Lasso, everyone's on like cannot wait for the new Ted Lasso to come out.
Great. Yeah, we couldn't wait.
And it's kind of, it works. It's kind of like
the fun back.
I think it is on purpose because it's like their release of the iPhone where they do this huge build up and everyone's talking about it. And they did, I don't know if you saw, there was some kind of commercial for their new AirPods where Helly from Severance, she shows up in the background. She's like this random girl who walks onto the subway train and that's it. But like it's during just an employee of Apple giving a talk about the AirPods.
God, that's right.
They like drop these little subliminal hints. I don't know.
Well, back to you. I just thought it was hysterical. So it's like, note to self, notice when it's the last episode, so that I'm not all excited for you for absolutely nothing. But I just thought it was a great story to start with since we're talking about quiet quitting today, because like that's the extreme of some major dysfunction at work.
Yes. Yeah. It is it's like the extreme version of it's weird. It's worse than Office Space for sure.
Oh yeah.
But you add in these like religious elements and these cultish things, and then anyway.
Yeah, we will. That's all we'll say about that.
So I just thought that really ties into quiet quitting.
I think I can see the connection.
Yeah.
Which I'm excited to talk about today.
Yeah. So yeah, if you're new to the show, my name is Steve Perkins and this is Sunday Marcourt, and we are from Greenhouse Coaching. We are coaches ourselves, but we also lead a team of other coaches and work with organizations and individuals. And so we talk a lot about things relating to career and life and growth and development, but it was interesting to us that lately one of the most popular topics out there is quiet quitting.
Yeah.
It's like right in our wheelhouse, but yet very few people had used the term in our, community or in our client circles.
Yeah. And now when you like look for it, you could search it in podcasts too, and you'll find it everywhere. You'll also you can look on TikTok and find it. But I was completely in the dark about it. So do you want to know what I thought it was at first? I thought it was, well, you know how this younger generation tends to even in my own household, maybe have a job and just decide one day, I'm done. And then they leave. I thought that's, in my mind, I thought this is what quiet quitting was. It's like you ghosted your job. You just quietly quit.
That's better than me. When I first heard the term, I thought it was just people leaving and not saying they are.
Okay, so very similar, actually.
Not broadcasting the news, You
just, quitting, but just not broadcasting.
Yeah.
It was neither of those.
Yeah.
So it was kind of fun to look into what it was, actually. And so actually, curious listeners out there, are you dying to know what it is? If you're like, I don't know what quiet quitting is either.
Yeah. Well, see, that's what we do here at the Career Sweetspot podcast. Right. We really just we do it for you because you're all nervous to admit you don't actually know what it is. So we'll say it.
Yeah. Some are putting their brakes on in the car right now going, what is this new term? I have to know. Okay, ready?
Yeah.
So it's really this. It's just simply, it's about not taking your job too seriously, or I've got a few definitions here. So I looked up different ways of saying it. This is what I found. Or switching off completely once your day is over. Okay. Or doing the bare minimum to avoid being fired. And it's a belief that life should not revolve around your job. So those are the nice ways of actually saying it, isn't it? I mean, to me, those sound like.
Well, see, this is what's funny to me about terminology. I'm not a person who likes themes and let's name everything. I'm actually really bad at that. But I know a lot of people like that. And I'm just sitting there kind of mad at quiet quitting because I'm like, no, this has always been a thing. But now everyone thinks it's a new thing because there's a name for it.
Right.
But what's interesting to me in the actual data is you've got basically when the pandemic was starting, all of a sudden engagement rates at companies was plummeting. It started plummeting. And it's been really low and changing ever since. And so really it was almost like this slow buildup until there was a name where people were actually checked out for a long time. And it's been going on so long and it's been such a problem that someone decided to name it. you ever wonder like where did the name start? Who's the first?
I think there's actually, I didn't write it down, but there's actually a person on TikTok who started it.
Wow.
And I'm sorry that I don't have that exact one.
That's impressive.
But something similar to it that I did find, see, why did I write this fact that I'm about to tell you down and not that one, was that in April of 2021, ready? China began their own social protest called Lying Flat. It means the exact same thing. But notice it was same timing. It was like so they had this, and they're basically, it's the rejection of societal pressure to overwork, to work hard.
Yeah.
So, but they have the lying flat. I like that.
I know. I wonder what the interpretation, it's like quiet quitting's a little catchier, but
yeah,
maybe lying flat.
It feels like I'm taking a nap.
Yeah. Yeah.
But I don't know exactly where it started, but I know it started somewhere in that, during exactly as you said, around the pandemic time. And I think it was just like, you're right. It's always been around, but something about the shift that took place in the world, and also felt like people struggled with their boundaries all of a sudden too. Remember, we got tons of coaching clients who were like, I feel overwhelmed because I used to like simple things. Like I used to drive home from work and listen to music to decompress, or I used to drive home from work and listen to and now all of a sudden this blend of work and home. And we had a lot of burnout people. And also they were like, we can get more, them bosses are, you can get more done. And I think there was like this silent protest where people were like, I am done. And so that's what I'm imagining quiet quitting came out of, something like that.
Yeah. I was also thinking before I started looking into it more, I was thinking it had more to do with if the boss can't be there staring over your shoulder and seeing you in the office, then it's easier to check out. Like people can get away with more.
Yeah, absolutely.
And the more I was looking into it, I'm not seeing that show up much in the research. That's not.
It feels like it could be though.
It feels like it could be.
Maybe there's one person.
But to your point, I think in a lot of cases that we hear with clients, it's the opposite is true. Because there's so many virtual meetings. Yeah. They're actually more, have more to kind of be engaged with all the time versus like, oh, you're at home and you can like hide and do different stuff. You don't always have to be on.
How many times have we heard this? We have this one huge client in financial services. How many times have we heard them say, for some reason, it feels like the last 2 years, I've worked harder than I've ever worked before.
Oh, yeah. Across the board. Everyone has said that.
Yeah.
I think especially the big corporate environments are definitely like that. Because you think of all that happens in hallways and in between meetings. Someone yesterday, they said, yeah, it's so weird. We don't get to like chat about what you did this weekend and that kind of stuff. And so I think in big corporate settings, it's not like, oh, you just work with a few people. You work with hundreds of people. Yeah. And there's all this kind of matrix cross functioning going on. And so you miss all of that and you have to somehow make up for it with more meetings.
Yeah, it's been interesting. I was looking up, the Gallup poll. They always, the current one said, I thought I would read these 3 statistics because it kind of leads to what we're talking about. It says 21%. So this was 2021 Gallup poll. 21% would say they are engaged in work. Okay. That's a low number. 1 in 3 say that they're thriving at work. And then 44% say that they were stressed at work the previous day. So I just thought those were numbers worth talking about or just noting, because it's why I think the world has kind of made a shift. So what I really want to focus on today is, now that we've talked about it, is like, what are your thoughts around the extreme sides of it? Like, what are the extreme sides of it? And where do the managers kind of fall into place with this too? Like, what's their response to this? I also have some thoughts about generation, like the boomers versus, the Gen Zs, in this way of thinking. Okay. I think there's some generational conversation there.
I agree. So do you want to start with kind of the bad side or the good side?
We'll talk about the bad side.
Okay. One of my first thoughts is, maybe we shouldn't start here. I'm thinking like, okay, if the other day I paid a neighbor kid to mow my lawn and I paid him, and if he shows up and he only mows half of it, like that's not cool. Right. I'm not into that. Right. And so I think there is one extreme. The negative extreme is people who might be like taking a paycheck and actually not really doing their job. That to me is just unethical.
Right. Like, so the truest, let's say, quiet quitters would say, well, that's not what we're saying. We're saying, I'll mow the lawn, but I might not edge.
Right. Which to this point of good and bad, I personally think that's
unless you're going to pay me to edge.
I know. I think that's fine.
Yeah.
But if you're taking it to the extreme of not doing what you're paid to do, that's not cool.
Not cool.
So that in terms of like the bad side, that's where my mind goes first.
Mm-hmm. I think this has got to be, I think of the negative sides of it as it can't work in all, choices of employment. I was thinking about that too. Like there are some jobs in which you have to hustle to potentially get the work done. Okay, so just a random one. I didn't even actually decide ahead of time of one, but I was thinking about how if you are a realtor, well, if people want to see the house now, or they want to put a contract in now, or they want to see it over the weekend, you could be trying to live in that quiet quitting place, but you will not succeed as a realtor, right? So I was thinking about the setting of which, and so what I'm hearing a lot of, is that in certain settings, people are trying to get away with this, but in some settings, you just can't. Like you can't quite quit, or else you actually won't make a paycheck at all.
Yeah, that's a good point. Another angle I was thinking about is how people can tend to, again, this is the negative side. People can tend to quickly look to shift blame, right? Like we do that as humans.
Yeah.
And so a lot of times in the workplace, and I do think it's becoming more frequent the younger the generation, it's like, who can I blame? I'm blaming my boss or my company for my problems. And so what you and I know in coaching is there's actually so much control that most people have over their calendars that they don't exercise, that they just quickly blame everyone else that their calendar sucks. And it's like, no, you actually can make changes even in a corporate environment where there's a lot of like pressure on you.
Yeah.
Or a lot of others putting stuff on your calendar. There's a lot you can do to own your own calendar. And so I think that's one of the negative sides is people really should be looking at taking more ownership of their calendar or their work to create the scenario they want. But it's easier to just blame and say the company is at fault. And so I'm going to like retaliate by kind of doing less. So I think there's a lot of it coming out of some angst around work-life balance.
Yeah, I think so too.
That people could take some ownership on themselves too.
I think another negative angle is that where do you use the sense of team? So let's just say I'm in a quiet quitting place in life and I'm like, but my coworker calls out sick for the week or something tragic happens on my team, but we still have a deadline for a potential client. Like where does that fall into place? There are seasons in which we go above and beyond because someone else needs us. And I'm like, the extreme of that is like, nope, sorry, it's 5.
Yeah.
Do you know? And those are the kind of unhealthy balances that I'm seeing that people could potentially be believing.
I guess. I think so. And I think there is a scenario where people could have the entitlement of, I want all the benefits and do none of the work.
Yeah.
And I think that's maybe one of the complaints of older to younger generation.
Say that.
Like, well, you don't step out of college and your first job, you get everything you want the exact way you want it. And we see that even with like, we coach on Career Sweetspot.
Yeah.
I mean, my entire mission in life is like help people find their dream job.
Yeah.
But the reality is you don't step right into that day one. No. You work.
Right. No, that's a really great point.
You work really hard to get there. And so if we expect that and then we don't get that, we're like, well, then I'm not going to go above and beyond. Okay, I guess you've got a little like life to learn is how I feel about it.
I know, I feel the same way. And I feel like some of the young people already are being like, click.
They're already gone. I know. We should have started with
because I do agree. And also sometimes I hate to say it, and this is what actually needs to change in the world, but when we step into those lower paying jobs in our first jobs, we don't always have the greatest management at those stages of life either. So it's a little bit like the hard, what is it called? Hard knocks. It's just what you said. As you grow up and get more experience in different jobs, you also might potentially, the hope is to bump into better leaders, right? That value you and have those conversations in your time. But sometimes the leaders, your manager, when you're 18 and 19-year-old is 23. And so sometimes they're not the best at being a manager. So you're feeling this anger. Like I actually heard this one line on TikTok where they were saying, I'm going to return the energy I receive. They're like, you don't give me good energy, I'm not going to give you good energy.
Yeah.
That's exactly how they feel.
Yeah.
So that's in some ways, extreme, but it's also like, it's worth noting.
I know. That's where it's almost hard to talk about the bad and the good sides because I do feel like I understand both.
I do.
It makes me think of, okay, recently I had a car accident, I have to deal with all the insurance companies, and it's just all such a mess and it's so difficult. And that's what I found myself saying. I guess I was quiet quitting the insurance companies because I was like, fine, like how come you get to never call me back, but I have to be perfectly on time?
Yeah.
Like, no, I'm going to stop calling you. And they tried to reach me the other day and I didn't answer. And then my first inclination, I'm such a go-getter. I was going to call him back the next morning. I was like, no, you call me.
No, that's
so really I get it. Yeah. I actually think there's a lot of good about that mentality.
They also notice that they're tired. They've noticed, this is another thing I've heard them say, is they're tired of getting and not giving and not getting.
Yeah.
They've noticed that in some workplaces, you give, and they are not seeing that person is getting anything different, or the reward is like, what was that? I think there's some video or TikTok somewhere where this guy worked there for 25 years and they gave him like a $25 gift card. There's like a joke out there. Like that is not what working hard should look like.
Okay. Well, can we go there with the good side then? Because
we can actually bounce back and forth because I have other.
Well, that just gets me. I think what's so good about the quiet quitting, we'll call it a movement. I think it really is.
We're just afraid people are going to check out on our podcast because we were saying so many negative things.
I know. Joe, can we get this part at the beginning?
Get the good.
I actually think overall there's more good than bad. It didn't sound like that at the beginning. And I think it's good because for decades and decades, the companies have held most of the power.
Yeah.
And so they can kind of not always get away with anything, but they can really like get what they want, and you just have to conform your life to the company.
Yeah.
Right. That's why there's so many jokes about, shows like Severance and Office Space a long time ago. They're all about this, like how ridiculous the corporate world is.
Yes.
We sacrifice ourselves in many ways to make the company happy because they've held all the power. I think what's good about this quiet quitting, I'll call it a movement, is it's shifting the power. And really it's more like the pandemic helped shift the power back into the hands of the people more.
Yeah.
And I mean, I'm sitting here as an employer saying that because I really do think it's a good thing for everyone. If people have a little more power, then they can say like, well, no, I want this to be more of a balanced equation, or I want to actually like have a life and not just sacrifice my family and my free time and everything for this job. So overall, I think it's a good shift. It's just like everything in our culture, the extremes went out on social media. So like
they did.
All the people who are angry get heard more.
Yeah.
I don't think those people are saying the right thing.
No.
But I do think it's a good shift.
Yeah, it's that working to live. So it's the working to live now, and versus maybe it feels like in the 80s, especially, they were like, you live to work. Like your job really on every television show felt like it was about the job. Right. So I agree. I think the shift is really interesting there. One other conversation, here's where I would like to go, is that if this is happening, managers need to be having some conversations.
Yeah.
If you know that you're hearing this term flipping around, the quiet quitting part actually raises alarm for me because they're quietly angry. They're quietly dissatisfied in some ways. And maybe it doesn't have to be quiet quitting. Maybe it can actually be like, let's actually have a conversation with our manager around what's not working on your calendar, what's not working with the load of work you're getting, right? So instead of quietly quitting, open up and tell your manager what you need. And that's the other side where I feel like, so the managers really need to listen to what people need.
Yeah, I do. I think you're right. I think this whole thing also highlights how there's been such a lack of that open discussion and good relationship between managers and associates. And I mean, look at it. Probably 80% of the work we do with teams in companies is this kind of like helping people have these conversations.
Oh yeah.
I mean, helping managers know their people, helping team members like be real with each other. It's a very common issue.
Yeah. So if the manager can't have a conversation, just know that your people might potentially be quiet quitting. So what's the risk? The risk is get it out there. Another conversation that I was reading about relative to the pandemic and times was, remember we had this big, like, we couldn't hire, companies were having a hard time hiring people. We're still in that place. In some ways it seems to be changing. But so when they hired people, they paid these new people a lot more money or gave them amazing benefits. And where the disconnect also happened was the people who had been there forever felt like, what about us?
It's like the Verizon thing. Like they're always giving better promos to new people. You're like, I've been a loyal customer for 20 years.
Exactly. And they're like, oh, don't post the wages or something like that. And there's one of the things I was reading was like, why not? Because it actually gets the conversation out there. Now, you can have that honest conversation as a manager if the person's saying, hey, I deserve this. You can honestly, statistically tell them why they do or do not. You don't have that degree or you don't have that certification, but be prepared to have those conversations instead of avoiding them.
Right.
And then people are getting all this anger and just you're losing loyal people.
Right. And it makes sense that people would be angry when they're not treated like adults.
Mm-hmm.
It's like, well, if you keep all the information from me and then craft this story that's not true about why you're doing what you're doing.
Yeah.
People just feel like I'm an adult. I can handle the truth. Tell me the truth. But we're all scared to talk truthfully because we've had this culture where we don't do that for so long. I think it's the same with, like we're in a world now where for a lot of people, both people work in a relationship and have a full-time job. And so they have kids though, and like something still has to happen to take care of the kids, drop them off, pick them up, care for baby. It's like, okay. And so we're all trying to figure out how this whole thing works. And you and I know like this is a huge stressor for so many people because there isn't really a good solution yet. No. And we're trying to create equity and all of these things, but there's also just the reality of like our system doesn't support how things work now. And so we still got this like corporate thing structure built around, hey, 8 to 6 p.m. every day, you know, doing this job nonstop. But like schools only are in session for half that time. And then what about babies? And so it's literally like the system does not work, but the work system was built for a different time with different scenarios. And it's kind of like the whole factory system thing. Like, well, it was built for this factory system. The world is different now, but we haven't changed the workplace. So again, I think it's good it's forcing some of this conversation that
I do too.
Everyone's craving flexibility and freedom because of this. Yeah. And it should be on companies to change how it's set up. Yeah. But like, I think there's a lot of fear around it. There's a lot of like, but then how do you just not let things get out of control?
I was just thinking about some extremes. So I have one client I was talking to that said they hadn't had a performance review in 4 years. He's like, I don't even know where I stand at all. And that's actually really frustrating him. And then we have other companies that we coach where they have performance management and reviews twice a year. And the only way you get to the highest one is if you are the person who goes above and beyond your job description, over the top. So there needs to be some balance there. Do people still want to hear and have something to strive for? Yeah. But
I know. We could do a whole other episode on this because anyone in that kind of a system, usually there's a lot of angst, stress, opinions around the performance management system. And I think you're right. It needs to change. Because so much of it was built off that like GE model where it's very much about comparing you to your peers, who does a little more than the other. And so, of course we get people who are burnout and quiet quitting because the whole system's rigged to make you have to do a little more than your peers.
Or a lot more.
And then you add on top of that, like we're constantly connected and we can have our phones there all day, all night. So of course everyone's overworking. What did we expect?
I know. I had so much fun researching this, right? When we were talking this, because I actually got sucked into TikTok land like crazy. And they did some extreme ones. Like there was this girl at a call center and the manager comes up to her and says something like, okay, so today you need to reach 400 calls. And she's like, okay, hold on a minute. Let me look at my schedule. No, I'll reach 200. Thank you very much. You know what I mean? And the manager's like, well, the goal is 500. And she said this came out in several TikToks. They were like, I'm going to act my wage.
Yeah. I do like that line.
Dude, I was like, okay. And then what does the poor manager, like, think about this position. I do feel for the managers right now too, because the younger generation is saying, I have a voice. I'm going to say how I truly feel. And so do we keep them? What does the manager do now? Oh, the quota was 500. You said act your wage. Can you see, like, the conversation's a tough one?
Yes.
I thought that was hysterical though. But
I do like that.
They're pushing back a lot on if they feel if the job that's being expected of them doesn't match their wage.
Well, here's an idea. Because again, like, I do run a company. I understand that side of the equation, which is hard these days. It's like, you can never make everyone happy, and you're always doing it wrong. And it's like, okay, what do the managers do? What do the companies do? I think one answer is help develop your people in their ability to manage their energy. So it goes back to the calendar thing. Like, people don't know how to manage their own calendar and be the boss of their own time.
It's true.
And so they get stuck in their own, problem. But maybe that's where some coaching and some support could really help to say, all right, here's different ways to think about and actively manage not just your time, but your energy, because that's the part that's changed in the workplace, but we don't talk about it. It's like,
that's so good.
We don't talk about it in onboarding, It's just like, here's a calendar. Everyone's going to fill it from, 6 a.m. to 6 p.m. Good luck.
No guidance at all there.
Yeah.
Also, I love that you even said if the managers are talking to them about their energy, because also, I mean, this in managing people too, that different people have different energy.
Yeah.
And so that's an important conversation to notice. So it doesn't mean you're bad or good. You have these spurts of energy here. We need to make sure that we're taking the advantage of the best you in that energy. Whereas this one, you are more maybe it's evenings, maybe it's days, maybe it's skills. I don't know what it is. But the point is, do you understand where my energy lies as my manager? Can I have that conversation?
Yeah. Yeah. Because there's no one size fits all for that type of stuff.
No.
But hopefully, I hope that the pandemic highlighted the fact that, like, our calendars can change.
Yeah.
Because I think we all assumed they couldn't, and it had to work this way.
Yeah.
And now we've seen, like, no, it can change, but there's some effort involved in that. Do you have any thoughts on, like, okay, what do people do, managers or associates, like, in this scenario to make it better? You talked about the conversation, but
well, I actually saw this movement, or let's just say on LinkedIn, somebody posted an article about quiet quitting, and he said, I'm going to make it a new trend. So maybe I'm helping right now with quiet managing. And that was what he said. And I'm just going to tell you what I saw in his post.
Okay.
That was really interesting. And that's because I'm not sure it's a big thing yet, but it just stood out to me. And what he's saying is, maybe instead of having all of our people quiet quit, we need to quiet manage, which means to him, let people choose work where they want to work. Stop checking employees' start and stop time. Encourage guilt-free time off. Remove unnecessary meetings and distractions. Listen and get feedback and trust them to do their job. I thought it was just I know it's like a little saying that he was trying to go off of it, but the truth is that is what a lot of people are wanting.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that's cool.
Yeah, it's funny because
when you were reading that, I was feeling two things simultaneously. One was like, yes, this is good. Like, I love this. And the other goes back to performance management, that a lot of people are listening going, yeah, but at the end of the year, if I do those things, you're going to tell me, well, you didn't really do as much as the other person. So
yeah, exactly. Also, let's talk about the people who actually have to show up to serve food at a certain time and leave at a certain time. Like, do you know what I mean? Like, there are some jobs where you can actually work where you want to work. So I feel like that's also talking about a certain, type of workers.
Sure. But so is quiet quitting, right? Like, that's not really a thing in the service industry or the...
Although I will say I had a conversation with someone in my kitchen counter the other day who was talking about quiet quitting. It was a friend of my daughter's, and he was like, oh yeah, I'm doing that. He goes, basically I'm a server. And in between, I just go over and sit at the bar unless someone needs me, because he's kind of pissed off right now.
Okay.
So he's like, whereas he might have been like scurrying to, like, also, didn't your parents tell you when you got your first job, never sit down, right? Always act.
Yeah.
I'll just like you're cleaning something. Do you remember that?
I think I'm just the nerd who did that on my own. I would be so busy with all the... I had a job at Wawa once. And I was the guy who in between customers, I would go like wash the door handles and stuff.
Okay. Because you felt the
I don't
need?
know. I just like being busy.
Okay, yeah. That's what motivated you. I liked being busy too, but I do remember my parents being very clear.
Yeah.
Almost like they made me feel like you will get fired if you ever sit down ever.
Constantly busy.
Yeah.
But yeah, I think that's one of the things that'll be interesting how this shakes out, because now it's kind of becoming a movement to no, don't do the opposite of that. And then I don't know what will happen.
Yeah.
I don't know.
Remember when I was talking about the generation things? Sorry that I had too much fun on TikTok. I swear this is my last one, but this one cracked me up.
I hope you were at your cubicle while you would.
I was at work. My cubicle. Yeah, it was my job to like research.
Yeah.
And then I also learned a lot about recipes, low carb recipes. And you know, every once in a while I'd go squirrel and I'd be like, oh, you're researching quiet quitting on TikTok.
Yes. Sunday, I've noticed you've been quiet quitting a lot lately. We need to talk.
Do we?
Your rating is plummeting.
It's plummeting.
But what happens when everyone's rating is plummeting? Maybe this is actually
it's the norm.
I think everyone just needs to kind of come together.
Yeah,
They're like, if all of our ratings plummet together.
Yeah, let's do that.
But then, you know, the overachiever will be like, I'm going to plummet a little less than you.
Just a little less. Or they agree to in the group meeting, but they don't.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yep. There's that person.
There's that one.
Of course.
And the manager's like, look at that shining star. So there was this really funny one where it showed the boomer, the X, the millennials, and the Gen Zs just getting a little bit of feedback at mid-year review.
Yeah.
Okay. So the boomer was, and they all were on Zoom, by the way. So they were just like looking at a computer and they're like, oh, oh yeah. The boomer was like, yeah, well, they're pretty much all retired now. But basically it was like, okay, I hate that feedback, but let me look at my spreadsheet. You only have to do 2 more years till you reach your retirement goal. You can do this. It's like push through the pain, even though you hate the feedback.
Yep.
The Gen X always feels like a weird word, Gen X's. They'll get that feedback. And this person on the camera was like, all right, yeah, they agreed. But then they were like, okay, theirs was, I need to strategically start looking for another job. Meanwhile, being still amazing, I am going to strategically, it's like they've checked out a little bit, but they're still there. All right. Yep. The millennials actually are right on par with the quiet quitting. The millennials were hysterical on there. They were like, yeah. And as soon as they hung up, they're like, yep, it looks like I'm showing up 9 to 5 and doing barely what it takes to get by. You know, like they just decided check out.
Yep.
They're just checking out. Whereas the Gen Zs, I mean, this is the TikTok. This is not Sunday saying this. This was the TikTok. Okay. It was hysterical. They look at the camera and they're like, yeah, no, I'm not doing that. And they just shut the computer. I thought that was hysterical too. Kind of showed us each one has its own process. And so this generation's talking about quiet quitting. And I feel like what it's doing is any trend that happens can be extreme. But also any trend gets the conversation started. And hopefully this term that we've both learned more about is getting managers to talk to their people and getting their people to talk to their managers. Because I think having a life outside of work is a beautiful goal.